Thank you for taking your time on this busy Friday morning and afternoon morning because we have people joining in from the UK, Europe, and Africa. And it's a pretty sunny, bright afternoon out here in India and, of course, the Southeast Asian countries. We are here today on to commemorate the World Meningitis Day, which actually happens tomorrow. But tomorrow being a Saturday, we thought of doing it today. And we had two leading luminaries from the field who were kind enough to grace the occasion and also take part in this very interesting webinar where we're going to talk about understanding and combating meningitis. To start with, we have Dr. Professor Ray Borrow. Professor Ray Borrow leads the vaccine evaluation unit at UKHSA. Since most of the participants are from the scientific community, Professor Ray Borrow needs no introduction. But just to talk a little about his profile, because if I get into the details of his profile, it would definitely run into pages. He's a renowned expert in immunology with a focus on vaccines against bacterial pathogens, especially meningitis. His extensive research has advanced the learning of meningococcal disease and informed global vaccine policies. With over 2 decades of experience, Professor Borrow has contributed to vaccine evaluation, immunogenicity studies, and large-scale immunological research. He's widely published and frequently invited to speak at international conferences, playing a key role in meningitis prevention efforts worldwide. So without much ado, would like to leave the floor to Professor Borrow for his valuable insights for the benefit of the participants. Over to you, Professor Borrow.
Okay, thank you so much for those kind words. I just wish you'd send a bit of sunshine to Manchester because it's only sunny above the clouds here. So I'll be giving a quick overview of vaccines for bacterial meningitis. And now, yep. So what I'll be covering is polysaccharide vaccines, very briefly, moving into the success of conjugate vaccines and herd protection, the importance of travel vaccines, protein-based vaccines for mostly serogroup B meningococci, and then concluding. So polysaccharide vaccines, we've had those since the late 1960s. I'm just giving the example of a meningococcus here. You take your meningococcal strain, you purify the polysaccharide, that's the sugary coating around the outside of the bacterium. So purified polysaccharide, which I've depicted as the wiggly red line. And then we've got a vaccine. So this is an example of a meningococcal ACYW vaccine, but it could be pneumococcal or Haemophilus. Immunogenicity-wise, with polysaccharide vaccines, so over on the left, you've got a B cell, and that has B cell receptors depicted as BCR. These bind a polysaccharide, they differentiate into plasma cells, which produce antibodies, but they're low avidity antibodies. What polysaccharides also do is they deplete the memory B cell pool. So there's no production of memory B cells. So response to vaccination is completely dependent on B cell maturation. So polysaccharide vaccines are not immunogenic in infants, and they don't induce immunological memory. So I'm sort of staying with the meningococcus as the example. Conjugate vaccine production, that began in the 1990s. So again, we start off, we purify a polysaccharide, but this time we actually conjugate it to an immunogenic carrier protein. And this is something like Crim 197 or tetanus toxoid. So our little wriggly red line now has a toxoid on the end. And then we end up with conjugate vaccines. Immunogenicity, this may look a little bit complicated, but it isn't. On the top left here, we've got exactly the same thing. The polysaccharide is coming along, binding to the B cells, but with the carrier protein, that gets internalized and it actually brings in T cell help. So on the bottom left, the thing that looks a little bit like a fried egg, this is the T cell coming in to help. So as well as getting antibodies, we actually get the wonderful memory B cells. So conjugate vaccines are not dependent on B cell maturation, and we can actually turn an infant's immune response into virtually that of an adult. So these are immunogenic from 6 weeks of age. So a quick look at the available bacterial, these are the sort of meningitis conjugate vaccines. On the top, we've got meningo. We have monovalent for serogroup A, like Menafrivac, and a number of serogroup C conjugates. We've got at least 4 quadrivalent conjugates for A, C, W, and Y. And I will touch later, we now have pentavalent conjugates, including X. The pneumococcus, that started out with what was sort of called Prevnar, and it was sort of Prevnar 7. That was replaced in 2010 by Prevnar 13, which you can see down here. So you can see the number of serotypes. I'm not going to read them all out because that would waste too much time. But as years are going past, the valency is increasing and increasing. And I'll put a few of the new ones being added in bold so you can see those. Haemophilus influenzae, that did start off as a monovalent, but now it is actually part of the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, Hep B with Hib on the end. And also there is a hexavalent with polio in, heavily used in most infant programs. So conjugate vaccines. So the UK was actually the first country to introduce the Men's-C conjugate vaccine. We had a huge increase in Men's-C disease. So this graph you're seeing on the right, this is number of cases and years across the bottom. We introduced the monovalent serogroup C vaccine in the autumn of 1999. And you can see the dramatic decrease in serogroup C disease. What we actually did in the UK, because we had cases in infancy and young children, but a secondary peak in adolescence, we actually did a catch-up right the way up to 21 years of age, all done within a year, and then increased it to 24 years of age. So this actually had an unexpected effect, because at this point, we didn't know about the importance of the effect of conjugate vaccines on disrupting carriage. So asymptomatic carriage, if you can disrupt that, it means that the pathogen isn't getting passed from person to person. So nasopharyngeal carriage, lots of people carry in the back of their throat, in the nasopharynx, meningococci, pneumococci, Haemophilus, and it is completely asymptomatic. All of these pathogens, the only known reservoir is humans. So a lot of people actually call the meningococcus a commensal, because it only occasionally causes disease. Same with the pneumococcus. In young children, toddlers, 80% of them can actually carry pneumococci. And all of these pathogens are transmitted through coughing, sneezing, and close contact. So who carries meningococci predominantly? And I'm going to go back to the 1980s. A study done just close to where Vinny Smith lives, I think. In Stonehouse, right. And the clear indication here, this is asymptomatic carriage. It's adolescents and young adults that carry meningococci. So we've now learned that conjugate vaccines can actually reduce the acquisition of carriage of Haemophilus, Streptococcus, and meningococci. So this is called herd protection. Some people call it herd immunity, and it really does impact and shape immunization strategies. So the graph that has just appeared, this is a carriage study. So it's not disease. This is asymptomatic carriage done looking at serogroup C, 1999, before we introduced the conjugate vaccine, and then 1 year and 2 years after. You can see the beautiful reduction in carriage. Then if we actually look at disease, and again, the left-hand bar is unvaccinated before we introduce the vaccine. The middle bar is unvaccinated. And this really does illustrate 67% reduction in those because with disrupted carriage. And obviously the vaccinated are directly protected. So risk factors for meningococcal carriage. We've got smoking, hookah, shisha pipes, passive smoking, kissing, attending bars, clubs, discos, and a multitude of situations where there may be overcrowding. If we hop over to sub-Saharan Africa, carriage rates are a little bit different there. So the studies mostly led by Sir Brian Greenwood. Acquisition was highest in the 5 to 14-year-olds, which is a little bit different from most of Europe. Smokers obviously popped up. Would smoke at home, that came up, but also respiratory infections. So things a little bit different there. So pneumococcal carriage, and it was actually quite hard to find some recent data here because so many countries introduced the pneumococcal vaccine so long ago that pneumococcal carriage rates are now a little different. So I've actually picked a study from Uganda. The highest levels of carriage are in those under 2 years of age. So if you picture a little toddler and the bright green nose, that is the pneumococcus. And it's followed by those under 5 years of age. So it's not adolescents like meningos, it's the very young. So in the UK, what has been the impact of introducing the pneumococcal conjugates? So this is disease again, and this is cumulative reports, cases. We've got the different years. I've cherry-picked a couple of years. So 2006 is when the UK introduced Prevnar 7. So these are the rates we saw. It dropped right down. 2010, we replaced with Prevnar 13. And then all of the recent years, 2017 to 18, disease is pretty much gone. So pneumococcal conjugates, again, fantastic. So that was direct protection. But if we actually look at indirect protection, so herd protection, herd immunity, and the big thing to bear in mind here, we're now looking at over 65-year-olds. So these are grandparents of those little kids. We see a lovely reduction, another reduction, but obviously disease is still occurring in the over 65-year-olds, but that herd protection has dinted the impact. Moving over to Haemophilus influenzae type B, there are obviously numerous types of Haemophilus influenzae, but I'm only going to discuss serotype B. Carriage of Hib is mostly in the 3 to 5-year-olds, and this is actually UK data. So in the UK, we introduced the Hib conjugate right the way back in 1992. But the age group you can see here, and this is carriage, is this sort of 3, 4, 5-year-old age group. If we actually look again, this is English data again, it's Haemophilus influenzae, and this is now invasive disease. You can see our huge winter peaks of Haemophilus. Then vaccine went in and warmth right the way down. We didn't realise the importance of a booster dose that was introduced here with the catch-up, and then we virtually have no Haemophilus influenzae type B disease left in England. So huge success story, and it is mirrored pretty much across the world where countries have introduced this vaccine. So conjugate vaccine, carriage, herd protection. Just to summarise quickly that section, the meningococcus, it's mostly adolescents. So if you're going to target a vaccine programme, go for the adolescents. But for the pneumococcus and Haemophilus, this is mostly in toddlers and preschool age children. So we're best to actually target the infant programme. However, direct protection is still needed for those at high risk of invasive disease, particularly immunocompromised. I always put in laboratory workers because I like to look after my staff, and travel. So I want to give you just a bit of a recent example where things went a little bit wrong, the importance of travel vaccines. So pilgrims travelling to Hajj, it is mandatory to receive the ACYW vaccine. But for Umrah, it isn't. And this year, I think there was a sort of extra big Umrah attendance, and we did pick up a number of cases of serogroup W, unvaccinated persons that had travelled from the Middle East, and a number of them had attended Umrah in Saudi Arabia. There was one conjunctivitis case in an infant, but we couldn't find any links to travel. This was also mirrored, so the Institut Pasteur in France and the CDC in US of A. And if you want to read up more on that, here's the publication. Okay, I now want to hop over to sub-Saharan Africa. So a quick look at epidemic meningitis in Africa. And please firstly note, this is disease, so this is not carriage. The y-axis, a large number of noughts have appeared on the end here. So in 1996, there was nearly 200,000 cases of meningococcal disease in the 26 countries that span sub-Saharan Africa. This actually happened in a couple of weeks in the dry season, and this sort of thing would not be allowed in any other country. And that spurred WHO and PATH on to actually try and get serogroup A meningococcal, because that is the serogroup that was predominantly rife in sub-Saharan Africa. This was produced by the Serum Institute of India. It was pre-qualified in June 2010, and it was targeted to all 26 countries across sub-Saharan Africa. And the age group was 1 to 29 years of age. And the idea here, learning from the evidence with the Men-C, was to induce herd protection. So there is a multitude of papers out on the success of Menafrivac, the monovalent serogroup C conjugate. I've just picked one from Caroline Trotter. This is just looking at 9 countries in the belt. I'm not going to read them all out, but they're listed there. So the incidence of suspected meningitis cases declined by 57%. But bear in mind, this isn't just meningococcal. But for serogroup A, which was the target, 99%. So an absolute incredible success. And if we now look, this is data from last year of the main meningitis pathogens across sub-Saharan Africa. So the red is serogroup A, and hopefully nobody can spot any red. It's gone. But the big problem is we do have plenty of green, which is the pneumococcus. We've still got Hib. We've got serogroup C here and here. And the blue is serogroup W, which is still popping up Ghana and other countries. So we're not at the end of the road as yet, but huge success story. So this has now led to the Serum Institute of India producing a new pentavalent vaccine. And this one is now serogroup A, C, Y, W, and X, and it's called MEN5. Another conjugate vaccine using different carrier proteins. I can't really go into all the immunogenicity of this because I don't have time, but it has gone through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. And the good news is Nigeria is actually the first country in the world to roll this out. I'm not sure if the title is completely correct because it isn't protecting against all meningitis, but it's pretty much covering all of the meningococcal serogroups that are prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. So another success story. Okay, I'm going to shift now to protein-based vaccines. And this mostly only concerns, again, the meningococcus. So serogroup B, meningococci, very prevalent across a number of countries. And we can't use the serogroup B polysaccharide. Basically, it's an alpha-2-8 link polysaccharide, which is exactly the same as is on our human neuronal cells. So it's then very poorly immunogenic because it's a self-antigen, possibly autoantigenic. So in the 1980s, meningococci bleb out outer membrane vesicles. So these are little vesicles full of proteins. These were used in outbreaks in Norway, Cuba, and New Zealand. But it's one particular protein called the porin A or por A that confers most of the immunogenicity. This has led on now to the development of 2 licensed MenB vaccines, each using a different approach. So Novartis, now GSK, used reverse vaccinology, and they've come up with Bactero. This incorporates the New Zealand OMV, along with a factor H binding protein, a nicerial heparin binding antigen, and a nicerial adhesin A. Pfizer have produced True Member, and this is purely factor H binding protein, but 2 different, what they call subfamilies. These are both licensed. Bactero has been used in the UK since 2015. And the really good news is we've seen a 75% reduction in vaccinated eligible age groups. And again, the paper's there if anyone wants to read up. We actually immunise because our big peak of MenB disease is in infancy. So at 2, 4 and 12 months of age, the 12-month being the booster. But the big question is, do these vaccines actually affect the acquisition of carriage? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. So they cannot be used in populations to actually stop or interrupt nasopharyngeal carriage. There's been a number of studies done. There was one in the UK. The biggest one was done by Helen Marshall in South Australia. You can see over 10,000 students. No discernible effect on carriage, which is really unfortunate. So these can only be used for direct protection. And as I'm running out of time, I'm going to conclude. So conjugate vaccines for the meningococcus, and we're now up to AC, Y, W, and X. Pneumococcus, we're up to 20, and there is 24 in the pipeline. Haemophilus influenzae type B, they give fantastic direct protection, but also the power of interrupting carriage is paramount. Please don't forget about at-risk groups, very importantly, travel, but also those other groups. The meningococcal serogroup B vaccines, these can only give direct protection. And just to throw in a question at the end, we still don't have a hexavalent meningococcal vaccine, A, B, C, W, Y, X. Pentavalent vaccines for A, B, C, Y are in development, and one is licensed in the US, but we don't still have a hexavalent. And I will stop there and pass back to Syed. Thank you.
Thanks a ton, Boro. I don't think we could have asked for a better overview of meningitis in terms of the pathogens that cause the disease, an overview of the types of vaccines, starting from polysaccharides to conjugates to proteins. Also, the disease endemicity, success stories got to do with Menafrivac and the new vaccines in development. Amazing overview in a short possible span of time. No wonder we haven't had a single dropout from the participants, all glued to the screens. I'm sure they would have a couple of questions for you towards the end of the webinar. At this stage, would like to invite Mr. Vinny Smith. Glad that Mr. Vinny had some initial trouble, but has found his way through in navigating, and he's out here. Uh, for people who are focused in the infectious disease space, again, Mr. Vinny needs no introduction, given the fact that the kind of work that he's been doing through the Meningitis Research Foundation as a chief executive, and of course, the Confederation of Meningitis organization that he represents. Just to give you a very short overview, he's had over 2 decades of experience leading global campaigns, including creation of the WHO Global Roadmap for Meningitis and initiatives like Global Meningitis Genome Partnership, significantly influencing public health policy and research, a strategic leader with expertise in advocacy, organizational development, and program management. Vinny regularly speaks at international health conferences and remains deeply committed to advancing global health and social equity. Ideally, we would have wanted Vinny to go first, given the kind of insights he would bring onto the disease prevalence, the endemicity, morbidity, mortality, and so on. But nevertheless, glad that Vinny has still found his way through. So without much ado, would like to leave over the floor to Vinny. Vinny, the session is yours. Look forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for being so patient with my technology issues and for adjusting the agenda accordingly. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to not waste any more time and go straight into my slides. So if I can share my screen, and if somebody could let me know whether that's worked. If I just bring that up, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, super, thank you. And
you just need to get to the screen share mode.
So do you have my full slide or do you have my notes?
We don't have the full screen.
Vinny, just go into slideshow and...
That's exactly what I've done.
Yep, and from beginning. Perfect.
Yep. And is that good now?
No.
No.
I think, Vinny, there must have been 2 decks which are open. So you just need to shut down the other and just have one.
Maybe if you could share your end, would that be okay?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm having some really difficult technology issues this morning for a reason I can't understand.
No worries, it'll be up in a minute. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm Vinny, as Syed said. I'm the Chief Executive of the Meningitis Research Foundation and Confederation of Meningitis organizations, and it's a real pleasure to be here with Mr. Ahmed and the Tech Invention team. And thanks again for the opportunity to present and to collaborate on the webinar today. I hope to share some insights into the current status of meningitis and the global efforts aimed at defeating meningitis by 2030. And I'm very lucky to be here on this day, the day before World Meningitis Day, which is our collective opportunity to raise awareness of this really, truly dreadful disease together. I really hope you'll find the session useful as I explore the progress and some of the challenges as well in defeating a disease that claims hundreds of thousands of lives each year. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Simran, can you move to the next?
I'm feeling slightly relieved it's not just me.
Yes, Simran, it's visible. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So as you all know, meningitis is a devastating disease. that is caused by the inflammation of the lining of the brain, and it can cause death or permanent disability. And although it's commonly preventable through vaccines, as Ray's just run through, many regions around the world continue to face major challenges in defeating it. So where are we today? Well, over the years, we've seen a global decrease in cases thanks to the rollout of vaccines, but outbreaks and epidemics still occur, and meningitis therefore continues to be both an endemic and an outbreak and epidemic emergency public health threat in many regions. To give you an idea of the scale of this, in 2019 alone, there were estimated to be around 2.5 million new cases of bacterial meningitis worldwide. And sadly, that led to about 240,000 deaths. Just to give some kind of bring that back to reality a bit, in 1 year, that's roughly the equivalent of the population of Jaipur, Addis Ababa or Vancouver who get meningitis, and the population of Verona or Hobart who die. If we add that up over 5 years, that means the population the size of Mombasa has died, or Marseille. In the same period, as many people as live in any one of, say, Los Angeles or Rio de Janeiro or Paris or Lagos has had meningitis. And just 5 years later, we've scaled that up to Shanghai, Delhi, Mexico City, Mumbai, or Beijing, some of the mega cities of the world. So you can see why sometimes it irks me a bit. And most people I know who've had meningitis, when people say their meningitis is a rare disease. So technically that can be true, but we're talking about large numbers of people here. And I think this is what led Dr. Tedros, Director General of the WHO this year, to write in a blog back in April, wondering whether this is the best kept secret in global health. Those are his words, not mine. And I would strongly make the case that it is. 1 in 5 survivors are often left with lifelong impairments, including hearing loss, brain damage, septicemia leads to amputations, and meningitis is the 4th largest contributor to neurological disorders globally. So I think you can see that this data underscores the urgency for global collaboration and accelerated efforts against the disease. Next slide, please. Meningitis is a global disease. It occurs in every country, though, as noted before, the highest burden is found in the 26 countries spanning from east to west, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in the region known as the Meningitis Belt. And this year, epidemics occurred again in that region, as they do in most years. According to estimates from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation for 2019, though, it was India that had the highest number of cases of meningitis in the world, though Nigeria saw the most number of deaths. If you lived in South Sudan, you were more likely to get meningitis per head of population than anywhere else. If you lived in Mali, you were even more likely to die than if you lived in South Sudan. Next slide, please. Of course, I feel very duty bound to highlight again that behind every statistic is a person. And at MRF, we hold the world's largest collection of stories of the impact of meningitis. And what you can see on the left here is our portal to stories from 822 people as of yesterday who have kindly shared their experience of meningitis. And that rose, people contributed to that in the last month, 10 more people. The map at the top right here shows our network of over 150 members in more than 50 countries around the world, many of whom have had direct experience of meningitis in their families. Personal stories really, really help us understand the human impact of meningitis. And on Gavi's website this week, you'll find many stories, including the one I've highlighted here from Nwanjeze from Nigeria, who offers his first-hand perspective of what it's like to have meningitis. And it's his experience and others like him that reminds us that meningitis isn't just about numbers. It's about real people, it's about real families, it's about real communities being devastated by a largely preventable disease. And by working together, raising awareness, we can change the future for people like them. Next slide, please. Of course, we know that doing this is extremely challenging. It's not easy at all. And that's part of the reason why progress against meningitis lags behind that for other leading infectious diseases, such as measles and tetanus. The community that's involved in these efforts recognises this and recognises that all too often there is a lack of country prioritisation, there's not the surveillance information and data that we'd like. Where vaccines are available, uptake can be lower than we'd like. Often vaccines aren't available that need to be to people. Diagnostic testing can be suboptimal, and there are few resources available on the ground for disease management. Next slide, please. But what happens if we fail to act and we fail to address these challenges? And it's worth noting that the cost of inaction by 2030 alone is truly staggering. If meningitis remains undefeated, we risk not only the loss of thousands of lives, but also a real economic toll on countries, especially low-income ones. The World Health Organization estimates that without proper action, meningitis could cost the global economy billions in treatment expenses, lost productivity, and the lifelong care of those disabled by the disease. But beyond that financial cost, the human cost, the toll, and the pain and misery for families can't really be measured. But the message from that is clear. Inaction isn't an option. The price is simply too high. Next slide, please. I'm delighted to say that thankfully action is being taken, and we're not alone in this fight. There is a global coordinated effort to defeat meningitis led by the World Health Organization and numerous partners worldwide. The Defeating Meningitis by 2030 Global Roadmap has been launched to guide countries, health organizations and communities in their efforts. The plan focuses on improving prevention, diagnosis and treatment. It also emphasises the need for raising awareness and strengthening national health systems to combat meningitis more effectively. Next slide, please. It's a really, really ambitious plan, and it sets really high level 3 targets: to eliminate meningitis epidemics, to reduce cases of vaccine preventable meningitis by 50% and deaths by 70%, to reduce disability and improve quality of life after meningitis due to any cause, so not just bacterial causes, but any cause. And it has 5 key interlocking pillars: prevention and epidemic control, disease diagnosis and treatment, disease surveillance, support and care for people affected by meningitis, and advocacy and engagement. And it's that 5th pillar which MRF collaborates with UNICEF to lead on. Next slide, please. As you'll heard, I have referenced the work of WHO throughout this presentation, and I can't stress strongly enough that if you take only one thing away from my presentation today, it's a plea to visit the website dedicated to the Defeating Meningitis by 2030 initiative. You'll find a wealth of information and links to relevant sources there. Unfortunately, what you won't yet find on there is links to everything that's happening, and in particular, what's happening regionally around the world. Though, as you'll see on the bottom of the screen here, I've dropped in a screen grab. There is obviously an intention to link out to what's going on in each WHO region, but the links are not yet live yet. I'm hoping they will be soon. Next slide, please. Like many things in life, we all know a good plan will go nowhere if it's not backed with funds and resources. However, implementing these informations at scale does require significant new investment. The financial cost of action is still estimated to be much lower than the cost of inaction, with the roadmap requiring an estimated $440 million of new investment, with $130 million needed now. The majority of that is for country-based implementation, with every $1 needed to coordinate the programme, $4 is needed to be used by member states. But even though those are big numbers, we've got to hold on to the fact that the cost of inaction is still greater than the cost of doing, the cost of action is still greater than the cost of doing nothing, continuing to lose lives to this preventable disease. Next slide, please. If the funding can be found, by 2030, it's estimated that just short of 1 million lives could be saved, with almost 800,000 new cases of disability having been prevented. The benefits to economies could be as high as $100 billion. These are not small numbers. In addition to saving lives, acting will reduce disabilities caused by meningitis, improve quality of life for survivors, and contribute to global health security. Civil society will be at the heart of this process, as we have been right from the start. And a world free from meningitis will not only be healthier, but will be more resilient in the face of future public health threats. So the benefits go beyond just health. They extend to economic stability and stronger, more equitable societies too. So the benefits are immense, and the future really does look promising if we remain committed and we can get these funds in place. Next slide, please. I'm pleased to say we are making progress all the time. Since the roadmap was introduced, and just this year, a new pentavalent meningococcal vaccine has been introduced in Nigeria. And if that's rolled out across the meningitis belt, we could see the end of meningococcal meningitis epidemics in the region. The WHO Afro region has also adopted a regional framework for the implementation of the roadmap, as has the Americas region. The EMRO, the Eastern Mediterranean region, is hoping to be next. Fingers crossed that'll be next year. Several countries across Africa have already developed their own national plans, and just yesterday, Brazil launched its national plan. These are now supported by a new operating manual published just last week from WHO that's on their website on how to develop national plans. And you can use the link shared widely throughout this presentation to find that. So with this momentum behind us, we hope that the next year there will be another new UN high-level meeting where the world will come together and the pledges for the funds needed for the full implementation of the roadmap will take place. Next slide, please. Sadly, if we don't match those two things together, the resources and the plan, the progress we make against meningitis will remain slower than we know we can achieve, and we will still stay behind other leading infectious diseases. Next slide, please. Hopefully, from just this short presentation, I've given you some insights on the need for the work that we're doing, the importance of your engagement with it, a sense that in the world where so much is difficult and so much doesn't seem to be working out so well, actually, this is a space where progress really is being made, and we could see a major shift in public health. It is possible. We are making great strides in defeating meningitis, although there is still much more to be done. Finally, before I finish up, another date to save in your diaries, 18th and 19th of November 2025, so next year, is the MRF Research Conference, which will be held in London. So if you're interested in coming to the world's leading conference, research conference dedicated to meningitis, that's the date for your diary, and you can find all the details on our website at meningitis.org. I'll wrap up there. Thank you again very much for your time and for being patient with my technology, and I look forward to the questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Mr. Vinny. I suppose we couldn't have got a better summary and an overview of how devastating and debilitating the disease is, the consequences of that. Compliments to you and team for the kind of amazing work that you've been doing, although there's a lot more to be done. I'm sure the audience, every one of us, would go back, get into the details of the website that you talked about, and see whatever bit all of us can do towards creating more awareness. Although today being a Friday morning out there and an afternoon out here, we have about 40 plus participants, but we make sure that the recording of this will be propagated through various social media platforms for the benefit of a larger audience. With that, I think it's time, although we are running out of time, I think we have a couple of questions that have come up. For those, although I already have a couple of questions that have come up, any questions that you would want to, please put it up in the chat box. Depending on the time, we would take those questions from our speakers. To start with, let me have a question for Professor Boro. Prof, how does the introduction of vaccines like Menafrivac in the African meningitis belt serve as a model for future vaccination campaigns in limited resource settings?
Yes, so that's a great question. Obviously, this was a massive partnership between WHO, PATH, and obviously the Serum Institute of India. It also drew in expertise. So the conjugation technology actually came from the US of A, actually from SIBA. And I think that was a fantastic model because the big problem is with big pharma, their vaccines are expensive. And Menafrivac was coming in at $1 a dose. So I think that sort of model should be propagated. Sort of leading on from that, obviously we now have the pentavalent ACYWX, and it's really nice to see that South Korea have jumped in. So there's a company in South Korea now pushing through another pentavalent. And these are low-priced vaccines, but when they run up against the big pharma products, they're usually superior. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, Prof, thanks for that. No wonder Menafrivac is a case study by itself. Cross-sectoral collaborations, multiple stakeholders, all coming together to make it happen, make it possible. I suppose that there's a lot of learnings and insights from that for the benefit of future and other campaigns to come. Thanks for that. My next question is to Mr. Vinny. Mr. Vinny, we were a little surprised recently when we came across quite a few articles of some of the meningitis strains developing antimicrobial resistance, which wasn't much of an issue earlier on. But yes, in addition to that, the point is, how does climate change potentially impact the spread and epidemiology of meningitis, particularly in vulnerable regions?
Yes, thank you. As you well know, the meningitis is a climate-sensitive disease, and this was highlighted in the recent investment case for the roadmap itself as under the title of, "Is this the perfect storm?" I think that, truthfully, we don't know just yet. What we know is that as things become drier and dustier and hotter, those things increase the chances that meningitis may spread. But as to where that will definitely be in terms of geographies, it's quite hard to tell. What we do know is all those factors are risks, and if climate change contributes to that, then the risks go up. And what we need to all hold on to is that vaccines can de-risk that. So the more we focus on the need to get in good quality available vaccines that people can access, the more we take the risk of that out of the equation.
Thanks for that. So more vaccines, equity, access, availability, affordability seem to be the words that would come in defeating meningitis by 2030, in addition to the various initiatives that you're already working on. Prof. Boro, your personal opinion on the need for a meningitis hexavalent vaccine, although you did touch upon it in conclusion, but if you could just throw some light from your personal perspective.
Okay, so I preempted your question by putting a little bit in my conclusions. For regions such as sub-Saharan Africa, they just do not have any serogroup B disease. But the big thing is we have to look back in time. So if we take a continent such as China, they had virtually no serogroup B disease. It was mostly A and then C. Serogroup A disease seems to be vanishing, but serogroup B disease is now shooting up. Obviously, the other component of a hexavalence is serogroup X. This is causing outbreaks in sub-Saharan Africa. It has been transmitted to Europe through refugees. So I think that is really needed. I'm not sure at the minute which country would actually take up a hexavalent, but we can't crystal ball gaze and see exactly what's what. So just to finish this, just above the sub-Saharan belt, all of those countries in North Africa, they do have serogroup B disease. And obviously yourselves in India, you have serogroup B disease. So I think it is definitively worth developing. So full thumbs up for anything that can be done on that.
Okay. Maybe also to add on, you had a slide on the travel part, especially in congregations like Hajj and Umrah. I think there this could also fit in well, right?
Again, I think this is really important because obviously pilgrims traveling from sub-Saharan Africa may export serogroup X disease to the Hajj, and then it could potentially go worldwide. What's been a little bit strange with the Hajj, the outbreaks have been, the first ones were all serogroup A, then it was serogroup W, then we've got W again. But what is going to be the next one? We just don't know.
Thanks for that. Mr. Vinny, we do come across challenges got to do with vaccine hesitancy coming in the way of uptake. Have you foreseen any issues, especially on the meningitis side as well? And if so, what steps could be taken to address those?
I think historically, meningitis-related vaccines have mostly escaped the vaccine hesitancy issues, and that's a very broad generalization. But we have often seen an awareness of the seriousness of the disease relate to often parents' willingness to get their children vaccinated. But post-COVID, we're into uncharted territory, and I think we are starting to see more questions arise about meningitis vaccines. We're seeing that emerging certainly in the States. I haven't yet heard of that happening more broadly, but the global experience of COVID vaccination campaigns means that I think we need to look at this area very, very carefully to see whether it is going to have an impact on meningitis vaccine uptake in future.
Great. Thanks for that. I think we've already passed the time by 3 minutes and would like to thank you for bearing with us. I think it was a wonderful session, great insights, a lot of take-home messages, and obviously, inaction is not an option. That's a catchy sentence for me to take home. On behalf of all the participants, I would like to thank you, Professor Borov and Vinny, for taking time out of your hectic schedules on this Friday morning and talking to us. We can clearly see that the audience has remained glued all through, 45 of us, right from the start till now. So on behalf of all of us out here in Tech Invention and the participants, would like to thank you for this. And would like to thank the participants for staying glued, putting up some of the key questions. And let us all of us take a pledge, given that tomorrow is World Meningitis Day, to do whatever little bit in creating awareness, carry forward and support the MRF in its initiatives. I'm sure that meningitis is definitely a devastating disease, but with people like Dr. Ray Borrow with this kind of research, we from the industry supporting and translating it into cutting edge technological products, and MRF like organizations with Vinny's leadership, we can defeat meningitis by 2030 as part of the global roadmap. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Have a nice rest of the day and a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks.